Welcome back to the Hardware Unbox podcast for episode 85. We're going to talk about quite a number of topics in this one. Battlefield 6 testing, some of the things that we've found about that game. We're going to be talking about some of the CPU performance stuff, especially relating to, I guess, Intel, some of the Intel CPUs. We merge into some discussion about the one-click overclocking tools, the whole tweaking and tuning community, and our thoughts on that one. Potentially Intel nerfing CPUs through BIOS updates as well. We're going to talk about Intel's latest GPU announcements and GPU architecture reveals that sort of in some ways relate to desktop PCs in a little bit, and then talking as well about some motherboard related stuff. So let's get into this week's episode. Well, I hear from you, Steve, earlier today that you had a bit of a frustrating time testing some things. So you've come straight off some frustrating testing into doing the podcast. So how's things been going over on your end today?
Today, not quite as smoothly as I wanted for a few things, but that's okay. But I think in general, things have been going really well. But yeah, I've had to cancel a video that I was going to do this week just due to time, and I don't even know if I don't know. I don't know about this one. Maybe I don't even want to do it. We'll probably talk about it a bit later on.
Yeah. I mean, the focus of a lot of the stuff on Hardware Unboxed recently has been your Battlefield 6 testing, where you've gone through and looked at both CPU and GPU performance at this stage. The game does seem to run pretty well, which is good to see. Mid-range, even sort of entry-level hardware doesn't seem to have too many issues, especially in sort of the competitive side of things where you'll be dialing down the quality settings. So I guess from that sense, there hasn't really been any shocks about the performance with the game compared from especially from the beta version to the final version. And it seems like most people are enjoying the game from that standpoint. The optimization, people are claiming it looks pretty good. I've tested a little bit of it, just sort of played around with it a bit, and yeah, it seems to be working super well. So is that sort of how you've seen Battlefield 6 so far as well?
Yeah, definitely. Yep, seems to run very well across a wide range of hardware. You absolutely don't need the latest and greatest stuff to have an enjoyable experience. It plays at pretty high frame rates on most modern hardware and even previous generation hardware, providing it's sort of mid-range to high-end. So that's good to see, especially given some of the other games we've seen this year that has not been the case for. But as a competitive, mostly multiplayer shooter, I think it's important that obviously it runs well, because otherwise the game's going to die out really quickly. It seems, based on what we're hearing from Battlefield fans, that this is a good one. They're really enjoying it. I'm seeing a lot of Battlefield's back type stuff. So that's good. I've obviously played it a bit. I've never been that massively into Battlefield. I was more of a COD guy back in the day, but we won't talk about that anymore. But yeah, it seems like a good game. So that's good, and it runs well.
Yeah, it seems like they've got their optimization targets down pat for this one, and sort of as you alluded to, understanding that for a multiplayer game to be successful in 2025, it has to run on a wide variety of hardware, even if you're running it on, say, the ultra settings. And the previous games have sort of been used as, I don't know, part of that sort of like, let's make a fun multiplayer game, but part of it as well has tried to be these sort of tech demo sorts of things. You can go back quite many years, and they've sort of been these destruction demos for, trying to get crazy destruction effects going. I'm thinking of what was it, Battlefield Bad Company back in the day that sort of tried to do that. And then more recently, they've implemented Battlefield 5, right, was one of the first ray tracing games, for example.
I think it was the first, yeah. Yeah, it's been much more of a tech demo in that sense than a game like Call of Duty.
Yeah, that's right. Or any other of the multiplayer games, really. Like you see most multiplayer titles running on potatoes, even on fairly high-quality settings. And Battlefield 6 seems to be bringing back some of that. Like, they're not sacrificing visuals. It's a great-looking game. They're just not bothering with features that most gamers wouldn't enable in a title like this, such as ray tracing, which I think Battlefield 2042 did have some very minor levels of pointless ray tracing that's just not used here at all.
That was one of the big sticking points with ray tracing initially, way back when it was first announced with the GeForce 20 series, whereas you were naturally more, I don't want to use the word it's excited too much. You were more interested and enthusiastic about it than I was, because for the games that I would play, I would play a Battlefield 6 over the games that you would play, like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, for example. And those games do not benefit from ray tracing. You don't really want ray tracing in those games, at least at the with the state of gaming and how they're played at this point in time. So, again, Fortnite's another one that has ray tracing, but I couldn't imagine enabling it to actually play that game. So
it's the same thing as HDR. You don't want HDR enabled in a multiplayer game either, because it makes it more difficult to see enemies. And a lot of those features like HDR and ray tracing both tend to make the game much more high contrast in between, like, you sort of, when you walk in and out of rooms and you see that lots of bloom and it's very bright, it's hard to see from inside to outside. You want to be disabling as much of that as you possibly can in competitive multiplayer games. And so those features just don't really make any sense. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to be recommending HDR monitors to people for certain use cases. It's just not something that you benefit from in this type of title.
And that's where I always thought we had a good balance, because you recognize that the single player gamers that would be more interested in that stuff, or who it was relevant for. And then, I brought the other side of it where I was like, well, a lot of people play multiplayer online games. And while they do, some of them dabble in single player games and they may want to use those features there. If you're primarily playing, if Battlefield 6 is going to be a game that you primarily play over the next whatever, then having great ray tracing performance isn't that relevant to you. And again, I'm not saying that people just play one game, but in my experience, there are certainly gamers who predominantly play like competitive online shooters and will jump into a game like, I don't know, Doom or something for just to pass a bit of time, perhaps on occasion. So performance there is not as important, I think is fair to say. Yeah, there's a lot of people who play these shooters that don't care that much about ray tracing, and that's true today in 2025. So how many years removed are we from when we had these initial discussions and dealt with all of that and, got hit with the ray tracing's the future and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the issue with multiplayer games and the visuals that they have is that the optimal configuration for everyone to use on PC is always going to be the minimum settings or very close to the minimum settings, because that will give you the highest performance, so the lowest latency, which does improve your chances of success in the game. And then also from a visual standpoint, you remove a lot of the things that make it harder to spot enemies, which again improves your visual, the ability to play the game visually. And the reason why they've got to include the low settings is because of what we were just talking about with Battlefield 6 and why it's a success, is that you need to make the game able to be run on as many PCs as possible. So obviously the solution, there is some future where performance of GPUs is much higher and the low settings are going to be much more impressive because they will be for that hardware of the time. But currently, the bulk cards that people have are not powerful enough for something like ray tracing to make a difference. So, I mean, like a game developer could make a multiplayer style game like Battlefield 6 with path tracing that uses it and is part of the game. You just have to accept things like the contrasty sort of nature, and that may be part of the gameplay. Like if you're standing inside a building, you can't see outside, and that's on purpose. But they can't do that right now because gamers on an RTX 3060, for example, would have to turn path tracing off, and so you can't have this parity across all systems. Yeah, so until the low spec gamer has the power to run those sorts of things, there will never be a multiplayer feature. So that's just the way things are. I mean, we do see, multiplayer games improve visually over time. They add in features. They make it so you can't nerf the low settings as much. And Battlefield 6 on the low settings isn't as nerfed as we have seen some multiplayer games when you turn it all the way down. But we're still not at the point where they can enable all sorts of features or force HDR, for example. Like a lot of people don't have HDR monitors, so they can't be forcing that feature on. So they have to just accept the competitive landscape of people turning those features off, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I've seen some things saying, I guess there's a couple of things with Battlefield 6 that I wanted to address in the podcast quickly. One of them is the VRAM leak over time, where I've seen people saying that if you play Battlefield 6 for longer and longer and longer, it will use more and more VRAM. Is that something that you've seen in testing?
Not something I've seen in testing, but I certainly wouldn't deny it. I think the 8 and 16 gigabyte testing that I've shown isn't a result of that. It's more that the section of the game that I'm testing does use more VRAM. And also it is true that outside of Battlefield 6, any video game, the more you play the game and the more areas you explore, the more you're going to fill up the VRAM. it's always flushing it and cleaning it, but it's not doing it super aggressively. Like some assets will still stay loaded, all that sort of stuff. So I think based on what I've read online, the people that are seeing and talking about the VRAM leaking stuff, they're talking about 30 minutes, an hour of gameplay where that starts to become problematic. Obviously, if you have an 8 gigabyte graphics card, it'll be sooner rather than a 16 gigabyte graphics card. But I think what I showed was pretty much how the game is going to behave. But again, they might patch that and that could change. It's really hard to say, but it seems to be a known issue at this point in time. But yeah, it also, like, I think the testing I was showing, you're looking at like 3 or 4 minutes of gameplay. So whether or not it can impact an 8 gigabyte card in 3 or 4 minutes. But if you load like even that the later section of my benchmark pass, if you load straight to that on an 8 gigabyte card, it is already noticeably slower than it is on a 16 gigabyte card. And then if you play just for a few minutes, then it starts to go to crap. So again, we'll have to wait and see. But we can't really conclude exactly what's going on there, because it's certainly a contributing factor, but to what degree within a few minutes, I've got no idea.
Yeah, and VRAM leaks are one of those optimization things that game developers can solve. So you'd hope that is something that they'd be able to fix over time through patches and that sort of thing, unlike other titles where, like Borderlands 4, for example, where some of the performance issues seem to be more deep-seated in that game. Now, the other thing I've seen with your videos so far is, again, this talk from a very small minority of the community comments and that sort of thing, online discussions, talking about the performance specifically of Intel CPUs relative to AMD CPUs in your benchmarks. This came up with the open beta testing that you did like a month ago, whenever that was, and it's come up again with the CPU video where, you've shown parts like the 14900K, for example, performing pretty similarly to Ryzen 7000 CPUs and that sort of thing. Obviously, the X3D parts are ahead as expected, and also a fairly sizable gap between something like a 9800 X3D and then like a 285K or a 14900K. And it seems that some people in the sort of Intel CPU community seem to believe that your Intel CPU is underperforming, or something about the configuration is not right. So what's happened there? Any comments on that situation?
Well, it certainly could be. I have, as I said, bought another 285K. Actually, I didn't get to that yet. I was telling you about that, but I've purchased a second 285K, a retail chip. There's probably a few things to note about that particular chip, but the actual performance between my review CPU and the one that I bought at retail, when loading, XMP, so what we deem as sort of the stock configuration, the performance is the same between the two. I've tried fresh installs of Windows. Obviously we want to get very accurate data, so I've tried everything. Similar sort of thing with the 14900K. So I guess starting with that chip during the beta testing, we showed on-screen statistics, and the CPU was pretty regularly clocking itself around 5.2 to 5.3 gigahertz when people were expecting more like 5.5 to 5.7. Unfortunately, by the time all this sort of surfaced, the open beta was closed down, so we couldn't test it. A few other people loaded the latest BIOS, which is what I was testing with on various different, whether it was a Gigabyte board, an Asus board, or whatever. Loaded up something like Cinebench, which obviously is a heavy CPU workload, and they were finding very similar clock frequencies to what we were seeing in Battlefield 6. So it seemed like it was within the realm of possibility. Anyway, because it's not a super popular chip at this point in time, I didn't really want to dedicate content to it. I thought we'll just wait and we'll retest it. So again, the 1400K, using the latest BIOS revision on our Asus motherboard, it clocks to about 5.2 to 5.3 gigahertz. That's the stock behavior. So it doesn't go to 5.7. I think the highest I saw was like 5.5 sitting in the menu. So like it or not, if someone gets a 1400K and puts it on a Z series motherboard with the latest BIOS, that's the clock speeds they're going to see. So, and it's quite interesting because I thought, well, how much slower is a 1400K stock now compared to stock in 2023 before all the, degradation issues and all that came up? So just last night, I thought I'd have a quick look at that and see. So I did some testing in Rainbow Six Siege, Marvel Rivals, and Cinebench with the latest BIOS revision for the 1400K. It's using DDR5 7200 memory. Again, just XMP loaded. That's it, what the vast majority of gamers do. And then I loaded up a BIOS revision from 2023. It was like December of 2023. And it was pretty interesting. I found that the 1400K, again, stock XMP loaded, was around 8 to 10% faster in Cinebench and for gaming.
And that's using...
Which I think when I think when Intel first started rolling out these, what would you call them? the stability patches, the BIOS revisions to address the degradation problem. They were talking about it being low single digit performance margins, weren't they? I don't remember the exact figures that were thrown out there. But
I think they might have even said negligible or like very, very little performance impact. But you're saying that the going back to the 2023 BIOS improved performance by 8 to 10%.
Yep. So, we were going from, just shy or below 500 FPS in Rainbow Six Siege at 1080p with the medium settings, using a 5090, of course, to like 540, 550 FPS. So it's like 50 FPS difference there. Obviously, you're talking about high frame rates, but...
And you've tested both of those at the same time. This isn't you're going back and looking at your data from 2023 and then testing now, because that could have been your CPU degrading over time. You're saying...
That's a good point.
Up-to-date testing, you went back, you reinstalled the BIOS from 2023.
Just rolled back an older BIOS.
Yeah. And so testing at the same time, the new BIOS is slower on the exact same CPU today.
Yeah, so the minimum margins I was seeing were around 5%. But it was usually around 8%. The higher end margins, like Cinebench, were like 10%. So it's been I hate to keep saying stock because it just seems absurd, because it's really a 14900K. Like the thing you were sold based on benchmarks back when it was reviewed, that thing is now like 8% slower, let's say, compared to, if you keep your BIOS up to date, you've now lost about 8% of its performance, which used to be like a generation or two of CPU performance. Like I remember when...
how much faster is a 14900K than a 13900K? Like 1%, 2% faster or something?
Than a 1300K, yeah. It's a couple of percent. But compared to a 1200K, it's probably a more like what we're seeing now, the 8 to 10%, depending on the test. So your 1400K has probably become more of a 1200K than it has a 1300K. And again, you can tune it.
Oh, the tuning stuff.
Well, look, you can. You can work around what Intel's done, and whether or not that's stable, whether or not that's suffering degradation, well, that's for you to pin your hopes on, basically. But, if you want to... I mean, I'm not even sure that you're ensuring that your CPU is no longer degrading. I don't know how much confidence anyone has in Intel with those CPUs. But that's what Intel's done. That's what Intel's done so that the CPUs no longer degrade and end up crashing and having problems. Whether or not those settings achieve that, I have no idea. But all I can tell you is, if you keep your BIOS up to date, you've lost about 8% performance compared to when you would have bought it if you bought it prior to 2024. So that's interesting. And it sort of, it made me think back to when, do you remember when, I think it might have been DeBauer showed that the, was it Zen 3 CPUs weren't clocking quite to where they were advertised to? They were falling short by about 50 megahertz.
That was okay. I do remember that. That was the biggest like nothing story ever.
Not to have a go at DeBauer. It was genuinely what he showed was true.
Oh yeah, and from a technical standpoint, it was interesting that the CPU wasn't quite clocking to what AMD had advertised, but in terms of an actual impact on performance, it didn't really do anything.
The actual performance angle's funny. It didn't do anything because you were getting the exact performance that all the reviews and AMD themselves showed you. So it wasn't like it was clocking 50 megahertz higher for reviewers, and then when it made its way to retail, it was 50 megahertz lower, which again would have been a negligible performance difference anyway. But the performance you were sold on was the performance you were getting. It just wasn't boosting to that extra 50 megahertz. So anyway, but I bring that up because that was a huge deal apparently at the time. You and I didn't really think so, and AMD addressed it with an AGESA update. AMD's done much worse things in my opinion, but that was, big deal that resulted in, would it even been 0.5% performance difference? It was no real performance change. Yeah, well within error. Whereas this is, I would say, a substantial difference, and no one's really talking about it. No one. It's just the 1400K has been nerfed, and that's that. So I find that quite interesting. So anyway, I don't know whether I'll make a video about that. I've tested a couple of motherboards now, a couple of brands. Does anyone care about the 1400K at this point in time? Is it worth making a video about? And that sort of brings me to the video that I was planning on making, but proved to be a bit more difficult due to reasons that I was really well aware of going into it. So I have a Core Ultra 9 285K that was supplied to us. It's a retail chip, but it was supplied for a review. So we've got that CPU. Long story short, another reviewer who didn't have a large enough budget to just go buy that CPU because it's like $1,000 Australian dollars, asked if they could borrow mine. I didn't need it at that point in time, so I lent it out, which I do with a lot of hardware. Turns out I did need it because AMD released a CPU and I need to update my 285K results. So I just went and bought one. And I thought, I'm probably going to plan on running that in my main system. I had a 9950X 3D, and I thought, it could be pretty interesting to run an Intel CPU for a year or so and see how that all goes. So I purchased one for testing. Now, the Intel 200S boost thing's become a bit of a thing recently, and I thought I would add some 200S boost results to some upcoming 285K testing. And this was 6 weeks ago or something that I started planning this.
And it's become a thing, right? Because Intel, it's protected by Intel's warranty, is my understanding. If you use
that's right.
the 200S boost, whereas on AMD, if you use PBO, it's not covered by warranty. So that's why people use it as sort of like a feature that's of interest.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that. So I enabled the 200S boost feature on this retail 285K CPU, loaded up Windows, that all went well, fired up a game, that all went well, started benchmarking, turned away from the system, turned back, and it was on the desktop. It's like, hang on, am I going crazy? I swear I was just running a benchmark because it was a canned benchmark. It was Rainbow Six Siege. So I fire Rainbow Six Siege back up, start running the test, and I'm watching it, gets 30 seconds in, it closes to desktop. That's odd. Try Marvel Rivals, first benchmark passes. Great, okay. Run it again, crash to desktop. Then I run it again, black screen, hard reset. Okay. Go in the BIOS, load optimize defaults, set it all back to factory essentially. Load up 200S boost again, try again, just kept crashing. So then I do a bit of searching around the internet to see, are people having stability issues with 200S boost enabled? And I found a few examples of people on forums at MSI, ASUS, and stuff talking about it. So eventually, I got back my original 285K CPU that I used for review. Stuck that in the Hero motherboard. So it's a Z890 motherboard. Loaded up 200S boost. Got to Windows. Started benchmarking. Spent multiple hours benchmarking. Not a single hiccup. Worked flawlessly. Chucked the retail CPU in. Boom, just starts crashing again. So I was like, so this one just doesn't, it can't do it. Like they could both run on a CAM2 motherboard up to like DDR5 9600. So the memory frequency thing wasn't a problem. It was something to do with the die-to-die or fabric overclocking or something that they were changing with the CPU there, because it does change quite a few things. It's a sort of a one-click tune-up. The more Core Ultra testing we've been doing, stuff like Battlefield, people have been getting quite upset, rather aggressive towards the fact that we're not enabling 200S boost by default. And the reason for that is, well, first of all, it's not a feature we would ever enable by default, warranty or otherwise, because, the reason we don't enable PBO has nothing to do with the warranty. Because I don't believe for a second if you, Tim, enabled PBO on your Ryzen CPU and it died and you sent it back to PC case gear or whatever, they're going to come back and go, oh, was PBO enabled, or we have some sort of trigger here that shows that you were overclocking. We're not going to, replace this dead CPU under warranty. Never happening in Australia anyway. So it might happen in other regions. I've not heard of it happening, but it's not really a thing. So the fact that, Intel say that this is covered under warranty, it's like, fine, whatever. Now, I think people extrapolate from that because this is covered under warranty, it is therefore guaranteed to work.
And 100%. Yeah.
And that is not the case at all. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say your chances of having 200S boost work are low. I have absolutely no idea of all the 285K CPUs, just using that one CPU as an example, no idea what percentage of those are and aren't stable using the 200S boost on my Z890 motherboard with my CU DIMM memory. Got no idea. It might be one, and I bought it. And that right there is a huge problem with the whole overclocking thing and using your tuned settings to show how fast this CPU is. Because first of all, I have very little faith in random person's ability to, validate that. Like, is it stable or not? And I'm not saying I would do a better job of it. I don't want to be the one that has to do that either. That's on Intel and AMD, right, when they sell you the part. So you're just hoping it's stable. You've run some tests for a certain amount of time and therefore it's stable. And I've stability tested a heap of different, memory tuning things in the past and it's come up good. And then 3 months later, it's gone to shit and started crashing and you've had to revert back to default. And I'm sure there's heaps of guys listening to this that have run into the exact same problem because things degrade, things change, and it can cause problems. So 200S boost is by no means guaranteed to work, but again, I have no insight into how likely you are to be successful or otherwise with it. So I thought it might be interesting to make a video showing that because it seems like a lot of people either don't understand that one-click overclocking options aren't guaranteed to work, or perhaps they just want to ignore that inconvenience and just pretend that turn it on or whatever. Because there'll be AMD. This isn't just an Intel thing. Like, there's been heaps of AMD fans who are like, you should enable PBO. It's a crime that you don't. There's free performance on the table there. Blah 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 blah. And we don't do it for AMD. We don't do it for Intel. But anyway, a video I thought I could make was showing the 285K that works with 200S boost and then the one that doesn't. And I did that knowing just how painful instability issues are to root out and show. And so when I had it over there on the test system, it crashed constantly. Balin and I moved it over, set up everything. We were going to film it, and it took like 15 minutes to get a crash. And that you might be thinking, well, what's the problem? The idea of the video was to show the people that believe, that you should enable 200S boost or whatever in the most transparent way possible, the CPU that works and the CPU that doesn't, almost without any cuts. So there's no, they can't accuse us of funny business or doing something else to make it unstable. And so we were going to great lengths to show this in the most transparent way possible. But then because it can be quite intermittent and, when it doesn't crash, it became quite challenging. And then I sort of just thought to myself, do I even care about this? Do people even care? Like, I'm sure 99% of our audience understands that Silicon Lottery is a thing. They understand that 200S boost, PBO, one-click overclocking options aren't guaranteed to work and can cause stability. Just like, every diehard AMD Ryzen fan will bang on about their undervolt and how great it is. But that too can lead to stability problems and you may not even be aware of them. So I just thought, do I ever want to make this video? Is it actually going to convince anyone of anything? And is anyone actually going to watch a 285K overclocking video in our audience? The answer's probably no. So it just became too difficult to do it in a way that I wanted to do it. I can show it crashing. We just have to set up the camera, run a loop test and walk away, and eventually it will crash. But I mean, how interesting is that? And at the end of the day, I might as well just tell you, I have two 285K CPUs. One of them's a retail one, and it doesn't work 200S boost. And you either believe that or you don't. And making a video where we do multiple cuts and edits isn't going to convince you of that. And I just don't think people are going to watch it. It might have been relevant when the 285K first came out. So that's sort of where I am with that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure people will sort of bring up the whole, you enable the XMP profile, which is technically an overclock, but you don't enable 200S boosts.
Such a weird argument.
What's going on there? It is a weird argument. My contention with this has always been that we should be testing the way that these products are advertised. And often companies are showing you benchmarks, especially AMD, with overclocked memory, technically overclocked memory enabled. And so regardless of whether AMD actually, honors their warranty or not, whether you use XMP, because people say like, you turn on XMP, now your CPU is out of warranty because you've used technical overclocking or whatever. If you're advertising a CPU and you're benchmarking with DDR5 6000, which is what AMD does, and they advertise motherboards with this feature, and everyone's basically on the same page. This is the optimal way to use the CPU. This is how we recommend you use it. But then on some technicality that's not supported via warranty, that's BS, in my opinion. That's clearly like, okay, in some document you've said it's not covered under warranty. In countries with good laws, that should definitely be under warranty. Like, it's just false advertising if you're saying that this is a way that you can use a product, but it's not covered under warranty. That's BS. So that kind of informs why I think a feature like XMP is used. And PBO has always been described by AMD, and similar with this 200S boost thing, is that it's an optional feature. We're not advertising the performance of those parts based on the PBO or 200S boost performance. When they released these processors, the performance benchmarks were done under stock conditions, which stock includes XMP, you know what I mean, sort of thing. So that is why I don't think those features should be enabled. If AMD and Intel are coming out with a new product and saying, we recommend that you use PBO, and we're going to show you the performance charts with PBO enabled only, and that we believe this is the quote-unquote default configuration, even if you have to enable it optionally, and we're going to compare to our competitors' products with this feature enabled, then it's fair game to review the product with that feature enabled. But that comes with the expectation that AMD would get destroyed if it turns out that some percentage of processors can't run that feature at all, which is obviously the issue that you've brought up with things like 200S boost. Like, if Intel was advertising this as a feature that everyone can enable, and we're going to benchmark, compare it to other processors, but then if you could randomly buy a product and not have that feature work, then that is just blatant false advertising, in my opinion. Like, you're basically claiming something that not all products can do. And so that would just be unacceptable. And that would have to be part of the review process. But the fact that it's not, it's an optional feature means that there's a bit more leeway with this. It means that you can sort of show what it can do, but also the understanding is it's not a default feature that would be used in benchmarks. It's optional. It's available for people to use if they want to use it. So yeah, that's why I would sort of think that why we use XMP and why you wouldn't use a one-click overclocking tool. And that applies to all sorts of other features that also are available in one-click overclocking. It's available for GPUs as well. It's just not something that we would enable in that way.
Yeah, the memory profile, essentially you are overclocking the IMC, but the memory itself is validated and guaranteed to work at the specs on the label.
Yep.
So if G-Skill say DDR5 7200 CL34, that has been validated to work at those timings. You then have to find a motherboard that's been validated to load those timings correctly and work with that memory. So there's a compatibility, like a handshake there. So the QVL is what you look at for that. So if you have memory and it's on the QVL, then you're good to go. It's just down to the CPU and how good the IMC is. Now, if you buy an AM5 CPU and it can't do DDR5 6000, you should be getting a full refund. I don't care what region you're in, because globally, AMD provided every single reviewer with DDR5 6000 CL30 memory, and they called that the sweet spot. They put it in slides. They put it in writing. So if you buy a Ryzen AM5 processor and it doesn't work with DDR5 6000, you need to get your money back. Now, realistically, every single AM5 motherboard as well, whether it be from ASRock, Gigabyte, MSI, Asus, all of those boards now are validated to work with that many different DDR5 6000 kits. But again, as long as it's on the QVL, it has to work. If it doesn't, you have a defective product. And if AMD is not giving you money back, I mean, let us know. Let Gamers Nexus know. I'm sure Gamers Nexus would love to do a piece where these AMD or Intel, whoever it be, both of them are telling reviewers that their CPUs work with this memory and that's the sweet spot, and then certain amount of CPUs don't work with that and they're not refunding people. I don't think that's going on at all. I've seen no evidence. I've not really heard any evidence of that going on. And on the Intel side of things, the Core Ultra series, they supplied all the reviewers with CUDIM 8200 memory and said that works. Use that for your testing. Again, essentially, I don't know. I don't think they used the exact same language as AMD where they called it sweet spot memory, but it was like optimal memory for performance testing. So again, if you buy a 200 series processor from Intel and it doesn't work with especially the G-Skill memory they provided, then that should be getting replaced.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Intel does use different language to AMD for a lot of their marketing. They don't always benchmark with the memory that they give to reviewers in the charts. Some of the time they do use sort of the JetX spec, and I think that the numbers that they do quote, because I think AMD quotes DDR5 5200 or 5600 or something for AM5 processors as the sort of the default JetX spec. It's very much a technicality, that sort of thing. They're obviously doing it just to ensure that, the 0.1% of CPUs or whatever that they can't do it, they can sort of get away with this. That's the goal, is to get away with it.
Yeah.
And we've seen this across many things. It's same with the Intel, when there was all that performance profile stuff when processors were degrading and Intel was coming up with, the default spec, the performance spec, the extreme spec, and sort of interchanging between these things, changing what default meant. Does it mean performance or extreme depending on the motherboard you've received? And our position has always been that if you're benchmarking and advertising a part using an extreme profile, but then a default profile is like an underclocked Nerf version, then that's unacceptable. And that's why a lot of motherboards back in the day were unacceptable, because they didn't allow you to run the CPUs at configurations that Intel was, benchmarking and advertising performance for. So all these things have always been unacceptable. And so, the sort of things that we try and show in our benchmark charts in general are configurations that are, it has to meet a couple of criteria, right? Like if XMP was really difficult to enable, like you had to go through and manually set all the different parameters for memory, then we probably wouldn't be using that in benchmark charts. It has to be, easy to enable, advertised, widely supported, and actually work on most processors as well, which is,
I think, above all of the things you just listed, it has to be a thing that people actually use.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So regardless of what hoops you did or didn't have to jump through, if it was a thing that the vast majority of gamers did and system builders did for gamers, we want to test the most likely configuration that you are going to experience. Like that's the whole point of a consumer review. We don't want to configure it in some way that you're unlikely to, or you have to go watch endless guides to work out how to do. And I mean, that's really it, right? And the vast majority, we've done polls on this before. The vast majority of people load into the BIOS, they load up a memory profile, they save and exit, and they go play games. So that's the steps of that's the BIOS level setup for the vast majority of people. And the reason for that is simple. AMD and Intel have validated their CPUs for that. Like that is the most likely thing to work, and it's the most likely outcome for optimal performance and optimal stability. Once you go tinkering and changing things, all bets are off. You could end up with anything. And people don't want that. And overclocking's been kind of a waste of time, I think, is probably the best way to put it, for a long time now. So even all of this drama over 200S boost across 14 games, I saw an average of 3% at 1080p using medium settings with an RTX 5090. That's what 200S boost does for 285K. 3% on average. You know what PBO did? 3% on average.
It's just not worth it for the stability risk.
Well, yeah, first of all, you are risking stability, but also it's 3%. Like, who cares? So I think at the end of the day as well, when it comes to the benchmarking, I don't really care whether you do or don't have 200S boost on. Really, all I care about is that if you have 200S boost on, then you are enabling PBO on the Ryzen CPUs, or vice versa. If you're using PBO on Ryzen, then you should use 200S boost on Intel.
Or if you're fully tweaking your system to the maximum degree, like you're going in fine-tuning your settings and you're making a comparison based on that, you have to do the exact same thing to the competitor's product. Like if you're saying Intel CPUs can do all this cool extra tweaking and it's all super unstable or whatever, it doesn't really work, but that's what you're claiming, and then you're testing that up against, a stock or very lightly overclocked AMD CPU, that's just highly misleading testing.
Yeah, I mean, it gets really messy at that point because how do you know what you're seeing on one CPU is, first of all, what you can typically expect to see, or is it a dud, or is it an overachiever? So
yeah, I mean, every time I see people claiming like all Intel CPUs can enable XYZ special overclocking features, you can just dismiss what that person is saying entirely. Like that is just not true.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
It's just not. So just don't even listen to people that say that really, because it just completely underestimates how overclocking is a silicon lottery thing, which is like, again, most people listening to this know this. They know that overclocking is a lottery and you can't just make sweeping statements.
As I say, talking of the Silicon Lottery, the funny thing about that is that there used to be a company called Silicon Lottery that closed their doors in 2021. And they said the reason why they're shutting down, at least for now, is because there's no point them binning already heavily binned CPUs. AMD and Intel are now pushing their parts to the absolute max. There's really no overclocking headroom left. Therefore, people aren't really buying their binned CPUs anymore because they themselves admit that there's really no point to it all. So 4 years ago, they shut down because overclocking was pointless. And I'm talking about like practical overclocking. Again, I used to do overclocking is what got me into computers and got me into tech. Like I've been overclocking back in the Intel Celeron 300A days. I did numerous overclocking articles and guides for the Core 2 Duo and Core 2 Quad series. The overclocking was amazing there. You could get like lower end entry level parts, get like 20% performance out of them. And stability wasn't really a concern. Like the majority of them did that. It was sort of just half of the course. Whereas now, the amount of time and effort you have to put in for these negligible performance gains that in most instances are going to compromise stability. And it's why the vast majority of people do not care. It's like, it's a niche hobby that's become increasingly niche. So, and I don't know what's going on with it anymore. Like I'm actually so sick of the whole tuning your 14900K, tuning your 285K, or undervolting your Ryzen CPU or whatever, because whenever we dedicate time and energy to looking into it, it's the biggest nothing burger. And there's so many reputable, or there is some good reputable overclockers like DeBauer, BuildZoid. There's Scatterbencher, who does really detailed, in-depth guides. So it's not rocket science. Like they're not doing something that anybody can get information on and learn how to do. You can go watch like Scatterbencher's guides, go through that, work out what your CPU can do. And again, when you do that and you follow someone who's not making wild claims and saying this and that, you find out that, oh yeah, when you tune the absolute crap out of a 285K, memory tuning, core tuning, the whole lot, it's like maybe 10% is the top end of what you're getting out of that, which is what he shows as well. Of course, you can get much larger gains for productivity. So I should just point that out, like overclocking the E-cores and stuff like that. You can get up to like 30% gains there. So that's quite substantial, but sort of a different thing.
It's kind of these days at a position with overclocking where, if you're going to spend however many hours implementing these tunes, testing the stability, going back, dialing it back, going through that process, loop after loop after loop, only to end up with maybe at best like single digits, 10% sort of improvement for gaming, what you're better off doing is, especially if you've got a part that's not the fastest part on the market, is selling your hardware and buying the fastest product that you can get and running it stock. And if there's any discrepancy in price or whatever, work a couple of hours of overtime at your job, because that's probably less amount of time and effort and money. Like, especially if you value your time at a certain level of money, then that overall scenario, you're actually going to be better off just selling your hardware immediately and upgrading to whatever is the fastest part. Because I don't know how much you can get for a 4900K motherboard and selling it and replacing it with a 9800 XeSS. I'm not sure how much price delta there is on that overall, but surely that is going to be pretty competitive with the cost of your time to do all that tuning and stuff to get it up to an acceptable level.
That kind of thing is insane cope. A 9800X 3D is vastly superior to a 1400K in multiple different ways. There's no comparison to be made there. I will just say though, you know, overclocking what it was once a way to get a budget part and get it to the mid-range or close to the high end, and that was the whole appeal. Back in the day, you weren't really buying the top-end Pentium 2, Pentium 3 and that, and then overclocking that. Some people certainly did, but the draw card for most was saving the money to then achieve the higher tier performance. And of course, that's no longer, you know, the case. But if you actually enjoy overclocking, if you enjoy learning what the settings do, tinkering with them, seeing what it can do, that's fine. And I imagine that's guys like Scatterbencher enjoy doing that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's the, I don't know what you want to call it, like the benchmark cope or the overclocking cope that's now come out of all of this where, yeah, I don't really know what's going behind it. It seems like some people, it's kind of like they want to be seen as the expert. They know better than you. They've achieved these amazing results, and we sort of talked about it before. It's like kind of, it's more
like me of like small man syndrome, you know?
Yeah, it's like really narcissistic.
Yeah.
And to be fair, a lot of the guys that I've watched that are very toxic about this show extreme narcissistic tendencies. So I don't know. I don't know if that's the guys that are in tech that have those personality traits. I'm not sure what it is, but
let's go through and psychoanalyze all.
I'm just at this point in time so sick of it, and I think most people are as well. That I just don't want to give it any more time and energy. I think I just want to get on with doing the reviews the way we've done them for the past 20 years.
Bad culture, bad vibes.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. And it's not an Intel or an AMD thing. Like we used to see this on the AMD side of things.
All the cope around how like bulldozer CPUs and stuff were supposedly had all this like unlocked potential, or there was the whole Vega GPU undervolting situation where that had all this unlocked potential. And it's always framed in this way. Like I've never liked the whole like I need to prove that what I've bought is superior to what you've bought, and so I will prove it by tweaking or doing all these things to it so that it shows up as being better. It's like it doesn't matter. Like, why do you care that your CPU or GPU or whatever is better than what someone else has purchased? Like, just enjoy what you have, and if you enjoy the performance you've gotten from overclocking, great. But like, you don't need to go online and start battling people about how good your stuff is compared to other people's stuff. I've just never liked that sort of thing.
So, I mean, circling back to the Battlefield thing, like the 9800X 3D is on average for gaming, depending on the games you test and how you test them, it's at least 25% faster than the 25K. And a lot of benchmarks, I'm not just talking about mine, like a lot of benchmarks out there will show 35% average when testing like 20 games or more. And that's just comparing, you know, optimal memory configurations, as in XMP Expo configurations. So the fact that the 9800X 3D is a good bit faster, it doesn't shock most people, which is why most people are like, yep. And I saw PC Games Hardware, they did a benchmark as well. They found the 9800X 3D to be 20% faster. So that's ballpark with my results. But they do test the JEDEC memory spec. So anyway, but again, what you were saying, if I game on a 12900K because that's the streaming PC I built years ago, and I haven't bothered upgrading it because it's mostly good. It crashes every now and then. I'm not sure what's causing that, but it's rare. It's not really a major problem. It's stable for the most part. Could I upgrade to a 9800X 3D? Sure. I just don't feel the need. Like for the games I play and the way I play, the 1200K is great. I might upgrade for Zen 6 or something. But if you have a 14900K, if you have a 285K, yeah, people are going to be like, oh, the 9800X3 is faster. You should have got that, whatever. Like they're all fast CPUs. Again, I'm using the 285K in my personal rig now, and I found it great. It's a perfectly capable CPU. It is very fast. It's really great. Would I recommend it? Probably not, for the reasons that we all cover in the review. And that's really not because there's anything necessarily wrong with the CPU itself. Now, it depends who I'm recommending it to and what they're doing, because I could recommend it for some people. For gaming, I certainly wouldn't recommend it because, again, for less money, you can buy a 9800X 3D system. It's going to be substantially faster and age better, have an upgrade path, all the obvious stuff we don't need to cover here. But if you bought one, it works well.
Let's move down to talking about some Intel announcements that they've made, which came out last week, but we didn't do a podcast last week, so thought we may talk about them briefly right now. So first of all, a lot of what Intel announced last week is relating to Panther Lake SoCs for mobile platforms. We don't really cover mobile stuff at Hardware Unboxed, so that's why we haven't really talked about it. But there's a couple of interesting announcements that they've made that do relate to the GPU side of things, because Panther Lake does have a new GPU architecture. So in what is I would describe as bizarre scenes that Intel hasn't really been able to explain particularly well, Intel are using a new Xe3 architecture in Panther Lake, so an evolution of Xe2 that we've currently got in Battle Mage parts, except for some reason, Xe3 in Panther Lake is still named Battle Mage. They're calling them B-series parts with Battle Mage, despite Intel previously stating that Xe3 would be Celestial, which is expected to be the next major architecture revision. But then Intel are also saying that an update to Xe3 called Xe3P will be called Celestial, and maybe that's the architecture for discrete GPUs. We're not 100% sure. But then, this base Xe3 or something is Battle Mage, and they've sort of come up with this bizarre reason. Maybe we'll show that on screen for people listening to or watching the video version. I think Tom Peterson said some sort of things like Battle Mage has a really good reputation or something, so that's why we're keeping Xe3 as Battle Mage, but then we're quickly going to update it to Celestial soon. I don't know whether this is like not actually Xe3 and they've sort of half renamed it into Xe3 or something, but it seems very confusing, and they'll potentially have this sort of weird, it's all naming stuff at the end of the day. It doesn't really matter too much. It's just that it's weird. And Xe3 does have some, benchmark improvements, enhanced ray tracing, micro benchmark gains, that sort of thing. But again, we don't really know whether this version is going to be used for discrete GPUs, whether it'll be Xe3P or whatever. But obviously, Intel is still developing the Xe3, their GPU architectures in general. But did you have any thoughts on this sort of weird naming stuff?
Not really. You know how AMD likes to copy Intel?
Yeah.
Things have been working out pretty well for them. Maybe Intel's like, we should copy some stuff AMD does. They do very poorly with their naming. Let's copy that. Make it confusing. Now, I've no idea on that. We're sort of going to wait and see what happens as well before we draw too many conclusions. But yeah, it's definitely very confusing.
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one there, but it's just a name thing. And mobile part names, man, are so awful that this just just flows into that.
Yeah, couldn't name a current generation mobile part. So I thought you were actually going to start talking about how this could allow for some great APUs, but you didn't go there.
No, because that's just not true. So
okay.
I'm sure that APUs would be great for mobile parts. Maybe we'll have to see with the performance and that when people benchmark it, but. Yeah, actually, on the APU thing, I wasn't going to talk about this.
I got him, guys. Put a little bit of bait out there. He nibbled, spat it out, and he came straight back for it.
Tangent alert. So I think what I saw recently was, and I'll just look this up. So the thing I'm going to talk about very briefly is, you know how we were talking about how APUs are really good for AI PCs? Or that was our theory, right? That there would be like this.
It was the one potential we didn't know, but we were like, we're leaving the door open for that to be potentially the case.
Yeah, it's just funny that we had said that. And then what came out, I think, a couple of days ago, by the time this podcast goes out, was that NVIDIA has started selling an AI mini PC called the DGX Spark, which they announced a while back. I believe it's some combination of parts. I haven't looked into it too much because honestly, I don't care about this product at all. I'm not interested in it. However, I was seeing that some people have actually tested this now because they'd sent it out to some reviewers. It's a $4,000 US AI developer PC. That's how it's being pitched. It's got lots of memory and all the sorts of things, except that in a lot of benchmarks, people have discovered that, surprise, surprise, getting a desktop PC and using the exact same things, like the same AI workloads, is both faster and cheaper. People have pointed out that RTX 5090 systems, for example, we're talking about a $4,000 mini PC. It turns out can run some of those AI models faster than this AI PC. And it does depend on things like the amount of memory that you need, blah, 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 blah. But in a lot of configurations, the 5090 is simply that much more powerful than this. I mean, it's a tiny little box. And people are also comparing it to things like MacBooks and things like that, and just coming to the conclusion that it has some strengths, but it's not this incredible APU-driven revolution for AI, and that desktops still do have a place. So anyway, I just found that interesting, but that's a tangent.
A lot of the comments, again, that were upset with us were saying, how could you guys deny the usefulness or whatever of APUs because of these handhelds and all that? And again, we're saying APUs have their place and can be very useful for mobile applications. For a dedicated desktop thing, they suck. Like, they're not a desktop replacement in any shape or form. But anyway, that's just whatever. Moving on. Move on, Tim, quick.
So the other thing I wanted to talk about was XeSS 3 multi-frame generation. So Intel is second to getting multi-frame generation out. AMD still doesn't support this. Not sure how relevant that is because I don't think it's a hugely exciting feature. So essentially how this works is it is a driver-based feature that hooks into the existing XeSS 2 API. So if you're not familiar with XeSS 2, it's actually not something we've covered on Hardware Unboxed yet. It is a game integration sort of feature that provides single frame generation. So I think Intel are quoting about 50 games support XeSS 2 frame generation. With XeSS 3 on Intel's GPUs. Effectively, you just upgrade it to XeSS 3 via the driver. You'll have a toggle drop down. You can choose 3x, 4x frame gen. Same thing as sort of NVIDIA. NVIDIA's is integrated into games as well, but some games you can override multi-frame generation into it. So XeSS 3 appears to be an Intel exclusive sort of feature for their GPUs. Appears to work very similarly to DLSS, so optical flow, other data inputs is AI based, similar to the XeSS 2 algorithm that they're already using. Does not require hardware flip metering, which was the thing NVIDIA claimed was necessary for their multi-frame generation, which is why it's exclusive to Blackwell. Effectively, NVIDIA was saying they implemented this new hardware feature, hardware flip metering, which would allow multi-frame generation to be paced properly so that you don't get weird frame time issues with that particular feature, hence exclusive. Intel is basically saying, well, we don't really think that that's necessary. We're going to have multi-frame generation working on all of their XMX-capable GPUs. That's Alchemist, Battle Mage, that sort of thing. No confirmed release date for the feature, so we can't test it just yet, but it was just announced as part of their software overhauls and software features. I haven't exactly rushed to test XeSS 2 because I find frame generation a very boring and uninteresting feature largely. Outside of testing it initially, once we sort of figure out what it is and what it does, I don't think it really justifies a lot of extra follow-up testing. Like, I'm guessing XeSS 2 works pretty similarly to what we've seen from frame. I'm sure there's quality differences, but I think when you're using a feature like frame generation, the quality isn't necessarily why you're using the feature. It's kind of just to boost smoothness and that sort of thing. So anyway, I'm just not hugely excited about this apart from just the interest side of things that it's now a thing. So we'll move on to maybe one more topic before rounding out this podcast, which is that motherboard vendors are starting to say the quiet part out loud now, which is that Zen 6 is going to be supported on AM5 motherboards. So we've seen a couple of updated marketing pieces of information from ASUS and ASRock that are not really beating around the bush anymore, sometimes saying, oh, we've got BIOS updates coming that support future CPUs. I believe we have seen ASUS marketing materials for a motherboard called the B850M AYW Gaming, where they're just saying this has a 64 megabyte BIOS and it's going to support Zen 6. I believe Zen 6 BIOSes will be supported across multiple different BIOS size configurations, so that just seems to be some sort of marketing stuff. But they're saying pretty explicitly on that marketing information, Zen 6. And then ASRock has also published a video on the Chinese video platform, was it Bilibili? I think that's right. Anyway, they're basically saying, yeah, our motherboards are Zen 6 ready. Like, you'll be able to slot in a Zen 6 CPU into this, and it'll run directly on that platform. So yeah, basically they've confirmed what we've long expected to be the case. AMD still yet to confirm support officially for future CPUs like that, but I think we all expected this, right? At some point, these motherboard manufacturers are going to come out and say that Zen 6 is supported, and yeah, that's what's happened.
Yeah, well, I think you were there for some of the discussions I had with engineers at board partners at Computex, and I just asked them, I said, so Zen 6, it's on AM5, right? Because, and they're like, yeah, definitely 100%. No, we're testing it, and we're preparing for it. Zen 6 is definitely on AM5. There's no chance it's on any other socket. It'll be fully compatible. So we got that confirmation back in what was like May. I think we'd probably got some pretty clear signs of confirmation before that when speaking with partners and people in the industry. But yeah, it was confirmed to us. And the reason why we really wanted to get that inside information confirmed directly from people we trust is because when we review these CPUs, we're like, well, AMD said there's future support and we're expecting Zen 6 to be on AM5, but they haven't, for some reason, officially confirmed that. And they still haven't, obviously. We don't know why, because it is. And anyway, when we speak with the board makers and they tell us it absolutely is, then we're pretty confident to go ahead and say we're very much expecting that to be the case, because we don't want to mislead you guys and you guys invest in AM5 and then it turns out, this turns out to be an Intel deal and you're getting 2 generations, the second of which is an extremely underwhelming step forward. So really Zen 6 needs to be a big step forward for them on AM5. Otherwise AM5's looking like it's going to stagnate a bit. But again, the recent rumors are saying Zen 7 will be on AM5. So we're not confirming nor denying that one. We have no insight. As I've said, every time I mention that, we have no insight as to what's the case there. It's really too far to start probing on that one. But yeah, Zen 6 absolutely is going to be on AM5.
Yeah, I think AMD has confirmed the code name Zen 6, and it is in roadmaps. So one of the things
did they confirm the socket?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah,
I'm merely saying that because sometimes companies don't want to reveal too much about future generations. Like, they don't want to say, hey guys, we'll have Zen 6 around this time or whatever, even though everyone knows the next architecture will be Zen 6 and it's probably going to come a couple of years after Zen 5, right?
Well, the reason they're not committing to things and being as open and forthcoming and the company for the community, like AMD, the good guys, is because they don't need to be now. They're on top of things. They're feeling very little pressure from Intel. So they've gone from, remember when Robert Halleck was on r/AMD and r/hardware answering questions all day and addressing stuff, and there was multiple Intel employees acting as full-time tech support on Reddit. And I think it's probably a ghost town now from AMD on that side. There's a lot less, at least that I'm seeing, community posts and community interaction and taking feedback and how to make Ryzen great and all that sort of stuff that we used to see a lot of. And as we said at the time, they're clearly appearing to be much more friendly because they're trying to win over the enthusiast community, because that sort of gets their foot in the door and helps with that mind share. And well, they played that pretty well because it's worked out as you'd expect those sort of plays to work out.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's gone that way, because I think AMD's actually done, especially on the GPU side of things, they've probably done a better job of supporting and making moves that are good for the community in general with the latest GPU generation. I'm sort of thinking about things like, a recent driver update from AMD has now made it so that, firstly, FSR4 is now enabled by default when you install the driver, and it's enabled globally by default. Previously, when RDNA 4 launched, you had to go and enable the FSR4 override for each individual game, which, depending on how many games you play, is pretty annoying. And I don't see why anyone would want to use FSR3 when FSR4 is available, and it works. That feature works really well. And so, obviously, over time, AMD sort of realized that this is a thing and is using just a global toggle now. They've improved the driver to fix that sort of issue. And that's something that previously, back in, like you were sort of saying, the Robert Halleck days, there probably would have been r/Radeon thread about like, hey, wouldn't it be nice if there was a global driver override for FSR4? And then an AMD employee would get in there and be like, hey, that's a great idea. We'll implement this in some upcoming driver. Now they're just sort of doing that. Another example would be, I've just recently tested some GPUs for an upcoming video, and one of the games I was using for testing was Hunt Showdown, which used to run really badly on Radeon cards. Now performance in that game appears to be fixed and does seem to work a lot better on Radeon. They haven't seemed, as far as I've searched, they haven't seemed to have made any comment about that whatsoever. It's just been rolled out at some point in a driver, and now we're not seeing, surprisingly slow performance in that game. Maybe it's because I pointed out that it didn't run super well in a previous video. I'm not sure, but again, that would have been sort of like a community upgrade sort of feature. And they seem to be doing a lot more of that on the AI side these days. So maybe that's where all their employees are, fixing all their AI software stack, not sure. But yeah, it's just interesting to see that, it's not like they've shied away from those community things. They're just not really engaging as much about it, I guess, anymore, is maybe a way of
you'll just
saying
see you'll see them doing more dodgy stuff though, anti-consumer stuff like renaming chipsets, adding features.
Yeah, that is
trying to
bad.
justify hiking up board prices, and
the mobile side's pretty bad, right? With some of their like part names are sort of using old architectures, but it's not immediately obvious that it's a current gen part, but it's using old CPU or GPU architectures.
Yeah, plenty of that going on the desktop. That's not necessarily a new thing, but they're doing a lot of it. There was, during the 2017 to like 2020 period, there wasn't much of that going on. There was the odd thing. But yeah, and like, with the DDR5 8000 thing, buy an 800 series chipset because now you get DDR5 8000 support. And then AMD fans were bashing us over the head going, no, you don't understand. Like, memory support's better now. It does 8000. Like, no, it's entirely motherboard dependent. And first of all, when we tested all the boards, hardly any of them worked at DDR5 8000. And then AMD were claiming that was the new sweet spot. It's like, hang on. DDR5 8000 costs considerably more than DDR5 6000. And it's not always faster. Anyway, just stuff like that you're seeing more of, whereas they weren't really doing any of that back when they were at a disadvantage. But now they're going along quite nicely, so they're happy to start doing more, or they feel comfortable rather doing more of that anti-consumer stuff.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the community path that it's taken, right? Is that they're not necessarily, as I was sort of saying, like not developing features or not doing those sort of community efforts anymore. But yeah, certainly on the more, I guess it's more of a business angle, isn't it? Like they're making more business decisions that aren't necessarily in the consumer's favor. I mean, they did try that with like the B450 stuff, and that isn't going to support the latest CPUs. Back when that whole thing happened, they did try some of that. I don't think they'll try that this generation. I would expect that the days of that working are over, and there certainly is absolutely no technical justification for doing so whatsoever. And I don't think anyone would buy any sort of reason that Zen 6 would not work on existing motherboards at all. So that just will not work.
Well, it was quite clearly a miscalculation on their end. And I don't mean just for making the decision how bad it was, but it was a miscalculation in the sense that they didn't realize what they were creating with AM4, like the significance of it. They just saw it as a bit of a headache, and that was really what they were focused on. So yeah, like I said, AMD was saved from making an AMD move there. They would have unwittingly killed their greatest platform ever to make BIOS support a little bit easier. So they were forced to take the pain, and it paid off big time for them.
All right. Well, I think that would probably wrap up this part of the podcast. I was going to talk a little bit about Microsoft and Windows 10, but I really do want to do a big podcast episode where we just dunk on Windows and the current state of it. So we'll get to that in maybe a future week, because I could probably talk for at least an hour on how bad Windows is right now. This is obviously because Microsoft has just recently officially ended support for Windows 10. So I think we'll get to that into a future podcast. And if you have any, I guess this is to the listeners, if you have any complaints about Windows, things that you don't like, I would love to hear from you in the comments. So leave all your annoying gripes about Windows in the comments. We might look at that in a future podcast. So
I'll get a hammock and a nice drink for that one. I'll just be a listener.
Yeah, some real shocking stuff going on. Anyway, for now, let's take a break and we'll come back and talk about our boring lives. And we're back, Steve. Let me know what has been happening in your extremely riveting life.
Yeah, well, I did mention I took 4 days off, which wiped out my weekend. Testing Battlefield 6 after having spent the week prior testing Battlefield 6. I think it was like the 10 days leading up to what would be this week. I spent doing nothing but testing Battlefield 6. I think I mowed the lawns once briefly. I got outside just to keep that under control. I did one thing for my wife over the weekend while I was testing. I ducked out for what probably amounted to be 30 minutes. You know, that Shelly stuff that I use, the smart switches and all that. I got a Shelly controlled ball valve to turn on the water for the veggie patch.
Oh, so is it good? Because I'm in the market for something like that.
Yes, it does seem good. I'm just having a quick look now to make sure it's doing all it should be. So yes, it's
how big of a ball valve is it? Like, what sort of fittings and stuff has it got? Is it a big one, or is it sort of more for like small pipes?
You can buy it in a variety of different sizes. I got the 25 millimeter one, which is one of the bigger boys. And then I just reduced that down to, a sort of domestic veggie patch watering stuff, which I think is like 19 mil. You are definitely more familiar with that stuff than I am.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, she does all of that, but I just did that one thing for her. So you can schedule it, all that sort of stuff. It's got sensors that you can tie it into as well. So under certain conditions, you can also have it turn on or off. So I think she's got similar setup to you, a lot of drip lines and things like that. But yeah, she'd experimented with your standard sort of, water timers and things like that. And they always ended up failing or not working, or, they'd seemed good for a little while and then went to crap. So this is a Wi-Fi controlled thing. It takes like probably 30 seconds to fully open and fully close. So it's fairly slow, but it's perfectly fine. And like I said, the software is very powerful. So you can write scripts if you'd like. You can integrate all that kind of stuff. And then it's got basic like scheduling and all that. So she's very happy with it.
It links into Home Assistant too, all the Shelly stuff. So if you've got like a server, you can do much more advanced stuff with the Shelly gear, which is good.
I think it was like $250 though, so it was quite expensive. But then I guess
that's not crazy for water. A lot of water timers are fairly pricey, especially because some of them are pretty bad. Like they just have Bluetooth or whatever. And it's like if you've got, both of us have sort of larger properties. If you've got this outside and it's not near your house necessarily, Bluetooth is like completely useless. So you really need it to have more advanced connectivity like Wi-Fi or some low frequency stuff.
So set that up quickly. All went smoothly like all of the Shelly stuff has for me. Just did a firmware update, got it in there, and we share. I just shared it to her account and she can control it and schedule it and do all of that. So yeah, did that. All good, no leaks. Nothing's exploded yet. So I ticked that off as a great success. But other than that, my boring life has been, I've been enjoying it. It's been fun. I've been testing and doing all that sort of stuff. But yeah, so today I took it pretty easy. Didn't really do too much. I tried to film that video that we decided was just going to be a pain in the butt and probably isn't worth doing. I'm not writing it off completely yet, but I think the goal of the video probably doesn't make sense because, like I said, I think people know. So,
Yeah, no, the reason I ask about the valve sort of setup is because currently with my setup, and I don't really have too much to talk about either, so let's just talk about this for a little bit.
Let's talk about ball valves.
With my setup for watering the garden, I water everything off my water tanks, and I've got quite a large number, or at least large capacity. And so what I ideally want, so basically with my current setup, I've got directly off the tanks is just a manual ball valve with a handle, and that just enables or disables any water coming out. And then at least for my veggie garden, what comes out of the tank is quite a number, like it splits off into quite a number of different parts. It can go to my veggie garden via a timer that I'm using from EcoWit, which works perfectly fine. But then there's also I've got like just a manual tap on there. So if I need to just get some water out quickly, it's got that. And I've also got a separate path that goes to another section of the garden, which has currently got, I think, no valve on it at the moment. That's just more of a manual sort of
The
setup for that.
old-fashioned way.
The old-fashioned way. But what I ideally want to do is have like, not necessarily like an emergency valve, but sort of something coming directly off the tank that can be also Wi-Fi controlled that I can largely just leave off, especially if I'm not going to be there or if it's winter or something, just for peace of mind of sort of like if there's not going to be any leaks or drips or nothing's going to burst and explode coming directly off the tank. Because sometimes, especially when you're having to change the different diameters of the pipes and you have to use adapters and stuff, getting it fully watertight at pressure to be used for all those different things can be a little bit challenging. So just having, I guess, like a peace of mind, I can just have the tank fully disabled via Wi-Fi. It's not going to come out of anywhere. That will be sort of a good sort of setup. So then
a kill switch is what you're saying for the tank.
A kill switch for the tank, yeah. So then if I wanted to water the garden, I could enable that ball valve and then also enable just the valve towards.
Yeah, I imagine you've got like a 40 mil pipe though coming off that for everything, right? And you don't want to reduce that to 25 mil for everything.
I have to check. Yeah, that's why I was wondering about the size. Like I'd have to check.
Yeah, I'm not sure they make bigger ones.
Yeah, I'd have to check exactly what's coming off that, but that would be good because I have had at times, the occasional small drip leak or something, and that's mainly because just of the pressure in the pipes and stuff, especially when they've got a pump and stuff. If it's up to pressure and then you turn off the valve, there can be a bit of back pressure or whatever in the pipes and stuff as things turn on or off. So the best way to sort of kill that is just ensuring that you've just got a thing directly off the tank. So if anything leaks, it's not really too much of a problem. So yeah,
well, I'll see if we can get them in bigger sizes because yours is, I think based on the size of your tank, it's probably going to be at least 40 mil, would be 50, but I would guess 40. So you're going to want a 40 mil ball valve that is Wi-Fi controllable. Not sure on that one. I'll do some research for you.
Well, we'll see what happens there, but that's something I'm definitely been sort of on the lookout for as I continue to improve all of the smart monitoring stuff around here. But all that's been going well on my end. We're sort of coming into spring. That's when all that stuff starts to get useful again, which is good. So yeah, that's what I'll be using. So anyway,
nice.
What has been happening around here? Not all that much, to be honest. So haven't got too much to talk about really. I've still been playing a bit of Borderlands 4. So quite far into that game. So eventually I'll talk about sort of my overall thoughts on it outside of the performance stuff that obviously we've talked about quite a bit. Playing Ghost of Yotei as well on PlayStation 5, which is a good game. I'm sure a lot of PC gamers will be keen for that game to come to the PC platform at some point because it's quite a good follow-up.
Is that? Oh, no. Sorry.
Ghost of Tsushima is already on PC. I think it came a couple of years after it debuted on PS5. I would assume Sony would bring the sequel to PC as well, like they've done for all of their games. But yeah, it's quite a good follow-up sequel. Been playing that with my partner on our TV in the living room, so that's been good. Lots of fun doing it that way, so she enjoys it as well. So anyway, that'll do it for this week's podcast. I think we've been talking for long enough. So thanks to everyone that's listened right to the end of this podcast. Apologies for no podcast last week, but we just didn't really have anything to talk about. So we thought we'd focus on, getting the other videos that we've been working on out for the main channels. So yeah, we'll hopefully be back next week with more discussion of things. Maybe we'll have a bit of a rant about Windows or something like that. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, if you want to support the Hardware Unboxed podcast, you can obviously subscribe in all the usual places, but also we've got Patreon. If you want to sign up and support Hardware Unboxed in general, one of the perks you get at certain tier levels is the ad-free version, the supporter feed for this podcast. So you can look into that. But yeah, thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next one.